Yep.
So Syndromes Without a Name is otherwise known as SWAN Australia, and we support families who have kids with undiagnosed or rare genetic conditions for which there's no other active peer support group. So we started off with just undiagnosed conditions, but as sequencing is becoming more and more available to families, we're finding SWAN families are getting a rare diagnosis, and that might be one in Australia or two in the world, and they're still isolated. So they stay with SWAN because that's where they've made their peer support connections, their friends, and we support them that way as well. Our primary focus is peer support, but with that comes an awful lot of advocacy work, trying to get sequencing into clinical practice. So there's very little funding at the moment for sequencing to be in clinical practice. Most of it is done on a research basis through Melbourne Genomics or Australian Genomics. So we're trying to advocate for that, advocate for better NDIS plans for our families with rare conditions because they kind of fall through the gaps, even though it's a needs-based scheme. You get better outcomes if you've got one of those popular diagnoses. So we advocate on that level, trying to get better communication between clinicians and our families. So there's lots of different things we get involved with, even trying to lobby for a newer tram to be outside the children's hospitals so people with prams and wheelchairs don't have to struggle. So we lobby politicians, we write submissions, do a range of different things.
How's that coming along?
Let me say it'd be easier if they all listened and followed our advice, but we'll keep chipping away. So look, we'll get there, but it just takes time. And it's not always easy to get access to politicians and share your views, but we're trying. So my daughter was undiagnosed. She was actually misdiagnosed twice with life-threatening conditions. And at the time, I was looking for a support group, and I rang the Genetic Support Network Victoria, and they said, oh, no, we don't know any group like that. But then they went away and they came back and said, oh, there's SWAN UK. We could help you set up SWAN Australia. And I thought, oh, well, that's good. If you're going to whinge about something, you should do something about it. Had I known how much work, and I'd be doing it unpaid for so many years, I might never have done it. But you just get a parent to say thank you, for your work, and that drives your passion to keep going. So it's so important that there's a support group for these families because there was nothing. And when you have a child who's undiagnosed, it's so isolating. You feel frustrated, huge anxiety of not knowing what the future holds for your child. So it's really important that you've got other people in your tribe who experience similar journeys that you can relate to, and that's where peer support comes in. It's so important. Look, I think it drives your passion because, we're very fortunate with our daughter. She's healthy, but I see many SWAN families who have kids with regressing conditions and chronic illnesses, and that's really hard when you're one of those families. And, it kind of drives your passion to make their journey a little bit easier. And I think peer support group, we've evolved over time. So once upon a time, I used to post on our closed Facebook group, coming into the children's hospital, would anyone like a coffee? Or if I knew a family, I'd often cook them a meal and bring it in. But now other people are doing that as well. So that's peer support. It's not just me doing it, other people are doing it, not just at the Children's Hospital in Melbourne, but other hospitals around Australia. So that's peer support really working, and that's how we measure our success, that everyone feels supported and not alone on their journey.
Yeah, it's great that it could just kind of develop by itself like that.
Yeah, look, it's taken a few years, and I think like any support group, the first 3 years are probably the hardest when people don't invest in you with grants, so it's harder to put on peer support events, and it takes a while to build an organisation. Yeah, funding. We shouldn't have to fight for every bit of funding, and we shouldn't be competing with peer support groups for funding. At the end of the day, we all want to help patients. So if I waved a magic wand, I'd like the government to invest in peer support groups. With testing, not having access to it, we don't have fair and equitable access to sequencing in Australia at the moment. So if you're not a patient of a children's hospital, then it's very hard to get testing. It's inequitable amongst the states. For instance, WA have an undiagnosed children's disease program, but they can only take one child per month. Where you've got over in Victoria, we've been lucky through Melbourne Genomics and Australian Genomics to be able to sequence a lot of children to get better outcomes for these families. They get a diagnosis, treatment plans get changed, and families get relieved of a lot of their anxiety.
So early screening.
Yeah, well, earlier genetic testing.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm hoping we get to the stage where, you know, sequencing just is integrated into everyday medicine, and from that, precision medicine comes about. So if you know what your child has, you know what medicine works for a first point of a treatment plan, rather than trialling a whole lot of medicines because you don't know what's going on with the child.
Mm.
I'd love the NDIS to get behind kids who need equipment. They often fall through the gaps. You have to fight for every bit of funding. If your child needs support, they need support, and you shouldn't have to argue and justify every bit of equipment that you need. So better outcomes and better support under the NDIS, better access to sequencing, better support after they get a diagnosis. Often, you know, that's when they fall through the gaps. Like a month later, everything falls apart. You know, there's more to a diagnosis than a name. There needs to be a lot more follow through, a lot more genetic counsellors on board, and you know, we need, I guess, best practice for how we look after families with undiagnosed and rare genetic conditions. So there's a lot more that could be done. We could have undiagnosed nurses based at hospitals. We could have rare disease nurses. We could have, you know, a genetic counsellor to assign, you know, to a number of families that they could access. But we're not able to resource that. That's the problem. There's a workforce shortage. Not enough geneticists, not enough scientific curators, not enough genetic counsellors. So, but, you know, we can wave that magic wand and hopefully we'll look back in 10 years' time and, you know, we'll say, look how far we've come, and that would be great. I think more people need to know about our group. So one of the barriers we have is people actually don't know about SWAN. People forget to mention us. So, you know, sometimes allied health workers don't know about us, maternal health nurses, sometimes geneticists. They're so busy they might forget to mention us. So that's our greatest barrier, is probably people not knowing about SWAN. We're still relatively young in regards to peer support groups. So we're still trying to get the word out there. And then we get people, I guess, families who know about us, but they're not in the right place to actually join a support group. They might sit on our Facebook page for a couple of years, and then they finally connect with people and they might think, oh, I wish I'd done that earlier. But it's a journey, and everyone reaches different points in their life where they're in a position to reach out for help. And look, I think never underestimate the value of a peer support group. I know personally from my own journey, some of my best friends I've made through having a child with a rare genetic condition, and I would never have met those people if my daughter had been typical developing.